The permission, Steffa.
Yeah. Okay. Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Black Voices Matter lecture series in recognition of Black History Month. This year's theme is belonging, finding a place of our own. While Black History Month is nationally recognized, AABERG acknowledges that Black history occurs every day of the year. Today we have such an amazing guest, and we cannot wait to introduce you to her to kick off this month's series. But please note that we will offer a special Q&A session from 1 to 1:30 with our speaker. In addition, feel free to post your questions to the chat. Our committee will keep their eyes out for those questions. We are also requesting that you take a moment to complete the evaluation at the end of today's sessions, and we'll make sure to add that into the chat later in the session today. So I'm Eva Terry. I'm the 4-H educator in Milwaukee County. It's an honor to be with you all here today. I'd like to just take a moment before we get started with our speaker to reflect on this week in Black history. It was on this day, February 21st, 1936, that Congresswoman Barbara Jordan was born in Houston, Texas. Known for her strong and commanding oratory skills, on July 12th, 1976, Jordan became the first African American to deliver a keynote address to the Democratic National Convention. She also gave a keynote address at the 1992 Democratic Convention. Jordan was the first African American woman elected to the United States House of Representatives from the South in 1972. Prior to entering national politics in 1966, Jordan became the first African American elected to the Texas Senate since Reconstruction. She became a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, leaving politics in 1979. Jordan also served as chairperson of the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform from 1994 until 1996. She died on January 17th, 1996 in Austin, Texas at age 59. Please take a moment to visit our AABERG SharePoint site and visit our calendar events to learn more. So I want to say thank you for sharing your lunch hour with the African American Black Employee Resource Group, more affectionately known as AABERG. The AABERG's purpose is to serve as a resource for and foster current and future African American colleagues' success by sponsoring programming, providing collegial support, encouraging belonging, and raising a collective voice related to issues that impact employees' ability to thrive personally and professionally. We would love your feedback, and we'll provide, again, a link to a survey in the chat as we close out the session. So I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge members of our committee. Danielle Hairston Green is our chair. Rhonda Davis is co-chair. Quintella Perry is secretary. Cheryl Isabel is chair of professional development. Catherine Borg Smock is our treasurer. James Bowling and myself are co-chairs of the membership and retention. And Carla Williams is our chair of marketing and media. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our guests and welcome Ali Muldrow, who will serve as our guest speaker for today. Ali Muldrow currently serves as the first ever executive director of WMF Wisconsin. Ali's career in activism began as an educator and an organizer. For over 10 years, she has worked with LGBTQ+ students, educators, and families throughout Wisconsin. It is through this work that she learned the importance of coming together and showing up for our rights. She is a parent, partner, MMSD Board of Education treasurer, Tuesday host of A Public Affair on 89.9 FM, and former co-executive director of Gay Straight Alliance of Safe Schools. To review her full bio, please visit the AABERG SharePoint site. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Ali Muldrow.
Eva, thank you so much for that introduction. It is really great to get to be here with you all today. I'm Ali Muldrow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I wanted to start this conversation with a quote. Maya Angelou famously said, "They will forget what you said, and they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how they made you feel." I think oftentimes when we talk about work, we talk about kind of this emotionless relationship to productivity. And what I want to talk about is how the best work is generated in partnership and in community and in collaboration. And I kind of want to take you through the journey of my career in realizing that starting in 2011. On October 18th, in 2010, a student at East High School was sexually assaulted by another student in the stairwell of the school. And the school had two responses. One was to hire a security guard, an additional security guard, to sweep the hallways and the spaces in the school that were less regularly visited by the general population of the school. And the second thing that they decided to do was lock that stairwell and put an alarm on that stairwell. You all are looking at the additional security guard they hired to sweep the building and make sure students were not engaged in misconduct in specific areas of the building. That job was a wrong fit for me, for who I am as a person and what I believe in terms of how you relate to young people. But it was one of the most incredible educations I've ever experienced. And so part of that job was pulling students who were misbehaving out of class. And I'm sure it doesn't surprise any of you that I spent the majority of my day taking Black students out of their classes for things like laughing, for things like eating in class, for things like eating too loudly in class while other students were also eating, often for very minor and trivial offenses. And some of what that looked like was me going to the same class over and over again to get the same students. So my first day on the job was January, the first day of the second semester. And I was invited to remove 3 kids from class on their first day of that semester of that class. And I didn't really ask why. And then I was invited the second day to remove those same students from that same class. And then on the third day, when I came to get those same students again, the teacher said, "You might as well just stand outside my classroom tomorrow." And I said, "How about I come into your classroom to see what's going on?" I was genuinely curious why these students were getting kicked out every single day. And so I went to this classroom, and the teacher seemed a little flustered to have me in the room and a little nervous about my presence. But I just sat in one of the desks and waited for the class to begin with all of the students. And I realized while I was waiting for the class to start that I had assumed the 3 students I had continuously pulled out of class were going to come in late. And they weren't. They were there on time, quietly in their seats, like all the other students. And the teacher went to take attendance, and he looked over the roster. And before he started taking everyone's attendance, he looked at one of the students that had been sent out regularly, and he started calling this student Sean. He said, "Hey, Sean, can you please move to the right seat? I don't want to go through this again with you today. Please sit in your assigned seat." And the student didn't say anything. The student didn't get up and move. The student did not respond at all. And the teacher kind of continued to say, "Sean, I don't want to do this with you. Please go to your assigned seat." Until eventually another student in the class raised their hand and said, "That is not Sean, that's Kendrick. Sean isn't here today." And I realized that this teacher had sent these students out so often, he didn't know which of them was which. He didn't know their actual names. And he was obviously embarrassed, and he went and took attendance. And I kept waiting for the incident that would require these students to be removed from class, all 3 of these students to be removed from class. And so about halfway through the class, a white student said, "Can I go to the bathroom?" and was given a pass. The teacher wrote out a pass for her to go to the bathroom, and she then came back and put the pass on the desk. And one of the students who was getting sent out repetitively raised their hand and said, "Hey, can I go to the bathroom?" And the teacher said, "Sure," and gave him the same pass that the other student had had. And when he got back to class, he put that pass, which is a little piece of paper, in the recycling bin. And the teacher said, "Hey, I'm gonna keep reusing that pass today. I want you to reach into the recycling bin and get it. And the student said, I don't want to reach into the trash. If you really want to use that same paper again, reach into the trash and get it yourself. And that's when the teacher sent that student out of class for misconduct, for insubordination, for refusing to reach into the recycling bin in front of his classmates and take out a piece of paper that the teacher had a whole stack of and could have easily recreated. Um, I then escorted that student to the principal's office, and I tried to reassure that student on the way to the principal's office that I would, verify what I had seen take place in the classroom. And what became very clear in that conversation between me, that student, and the principal was that I was expected to reinforce staff, even if I didn't agree with how they were treating a young person. And that hit really close to home in a couple ways. I attended East High School. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. I was born in 1987. I entered our school system in 1992. I graduated from East in 2005. And in the entire time I was at school, I had never interacted with security. I had never been aware of this dynamic of staff aligning and reinforcing the removal of certain students from class over and over again, and not being willing to be critical of why that was happening. That work environment was one thing in terms of how I was asked to relate to the young people I was supposed to be working with. It was another thing in terms of how I was related to because of how Black students were treated more generally. So how Black students were treated was directly informing the way Black staff were treated and perceived within the school. And that became really clear to me a few months later when my oldest child broke her leg. And she was about 1.5 years old. And my mom called me and was like, Adrienne is hurt. We're going to take her to the doctor. Can you meet us at the ER? And so I left the school immediately. And I remember what time it was to this day because it's one of the most terrifying calls you can get as a parent is to think about your kid being hurt and not knowing exactly how hurt they are or what they need, but to know that they're on their way to the ER. I left the school. I went to the ER. Adrienne had a pretty major break to her leg. I came back to work the next day with, knowing my 1-year-old was at daycare with a cast on her leg. And I had my principal sign a slip that said I had left early at a specific time. And that should have been the end of the story. And part of what I wanted to talk about today was kind of the power of an alternate ending. So it should have been the end of the story. I said, hey, this is what time I left. I was an hourly staff. I didn't make it, I didn't work the entire day. So I expected to see an adjustment in my compensation related to the fact that I had left early because my child was hurt. A few weeks later, I got an email from one of the secretaries in the building, and she said, Ali, I am going to deduct an additional hour from when you left because you did not represent what time you left accurately on the slip you had signed by your supervisor. And I wrote back, I'm not sure why you think that. And she said, well, another person in the building observed you leave at a different time than when you said you left. And that could have been the end right there. I could have accepted that I was going to lose an hour and kind of accepted that like maybe I got it wrong. But because it had been so traumatic to have my kid be injured, I was really sure about what time I had left. And because I worked in security, I was also really sure that there was a camera in front of the door that had captured me leaving at the exact time I exited the building. And so I reached out to this receptionist and said, hey, I want to show you on camera what time I left. Do you want to come to the security office and review the tape? And she did. And I assumed that she would apologize, that she would say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, that's my mistake. But instead, she said, this isn't really that big of a deal. It's just an hour. And I argued, like, hey, one, like, if it wasn't that big a deal, why did you change it? And two, not paying people for their labor, not paying Black people for their labor is the foundation of racism. So it is a big deal to me. It is important to me that I be compensated for the work that I do. But the cherry on top of this was when I talked to a really good friend of mine who also worked at the building, and her name was Jessica, and we have kids who are the same age. And she told me, she was also an hourly staff, and she said, you know, when my child got sick, nobody asked me what time I left. And I left much, much earlier than you. And I never even filled out the sheet that said that there should be an adjustment to my compensation. She said the only thing people asked me was, is Frank okay? And that was like the most heartbreaking moment uh in this experience, was really not just that I had been treated poorly or the effort that had gone into monitoring, policing, discrediting me, but also the idea that were I to look different, I would have been met with compassion and care and consideration and a generalized sense that my child matters. It wasn't the job for me. And I left that job knowing that I was going to have to create a space within my work in which I could have a culture of respect and shared values and shared leadership. And I knew at that point in my professional career that I wasn't just going to find or stumble across that environment. I was going to have to create it. So in 2014, I took a job as the racial justice youth organizer for the Gay Straight Alliance for Safe Schools, G-Safe. And what they were hiring me to do was to teach a class called Foundations of Leadership. I tell folks all the time, great leaders are people who look at the way the world is, and see what it could be instead. So when you're teaching leadership, you're teaching an orientation of the imagination. How do we reimagine a better world? And I thought I was completely ready to teach this class. I had been working with young people since 2006 in a variety of capacities. I had designed inclusive curriculums intentionally before by working with a class at West High School called Rising Up, the study of the literature of people oppressed. And by working with urban art forms and starting the first spoken word class for English credit and study of urban art forms at East High School. And so I came in and I was like raring to go. I was so excited. And I started to put together a curriculum for these students. And about 2 days before I was supposed to teach the first class, it hit me that a lot of the people in this curriculum looked like me. A lot of them were queer in the same way that I'm queer. I tell folks all the time, I'm the B and the Q in LGBTQ. A lot of them were cisgender folks, a lot of them were Black, a lot of them came out of the civil rights movement. And I started to question whether or not, if you came into my class and you identified as Hmong and a refugee and trans masculine, if you would see yourself in what I was calling leadership. And it hit me in a really intense way that you would not. And I had like this moment of panic, and I don't know if there's any other people here that when you get really stressed out, you like write lists, but I like love a good list. I'm like, a list will fix this. And so I sat down and I started to make this list of what racism, sexism, and homophobia have in common. And I came up with a little over 600 words. And sometimes when I'm in a more interactive workshop space with folks, I'll ask folks to try to help me make this list again. But it boiled down to 2 words in the end. And those 2 words were entitlement and abuse. And I started to think about what is the opposite of entitlement and abuse. And the opposite of entitlement and abuse, per my understanding, is consent. And so what I thought about was how to make a classroom consensual. And a lot of times I don't think we think about the work environment of our young people, the things that our students need to produce their best work, to be incredibly successful, to be deeply invested in their own intellectual growth. And I would love to tell you all that that is when I invented consent culture in the classroom, but that's not how it happened, right? Consent culture is something that I experienced before I ever started to utilize it at school with my own students. And so the way I was introduced to consent culture goes back to my own education. By the time I was 14 years old, I was a tremendously angry student. I entered high school with a pretty big chip on my shoulder in terms of race dynamics in Madison. I can remember being about 9 years old and asking my dad, How can Madison be so liberal and so progressive and racist enough to discriminate against children at school? My dad said something I will never forget. He said, everybody is liberal and progressive when they're talking about themselves. Everybody knows that a cage isn't the answer when they make a mistake. Everybody knows that slavery is not right for them or their children. It's whether or not you think those things are right for other people that determines whether or not you are liberal. And so I had this lens that Madison was a space that patted itself on the back for making it easy to be white in this community and easy to be privileged and easy to be affluent. And I entered high school deeply resenting the experiences I had had in middle school and elementary school. And that is until I entered Jessica Hatz's class. And you all should know I'm from the east side of Madison. And so I made a decision as a 14-year-old that I was going to protest my history class. I had no idea who was teaching it, but I knew that I wanted to channel my rage into that subject area. And I made this decision that I would come to class, I'd be really polite in class, I'd participate in class, but I would not hand in any work. So if she gave me a test, I'd put my name in on it and I'd give it back to her blank. If she gave me an assignment, I'd put my name on it and I'd give it back to her blank. And this went on for 3 weeks. And then Jessica Hatz pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Ellie, you seem really smart and you seem really interested, but you're failing my class. And I want to know why." And I had been waiting for this moment, y'all. I was so excited. Like 14-year-old me was like, "Oh, yes, Jessica, the trap has been set and you have fallen into it." And so I said, "I'm not going to do any work in your class, Jessica, because your class is racist." And if you've ever called anything racist, you know that that's not usually the start of like a friendly chat, right? People usually get defensive, people shut down, people don't want to be seen as racist. And she's a really hardworking teacher. And so I had an expectation of how she would react to me calling her class racist. Well, I was like, "What do you got for me now, Miss Hotz?" And she really surprised me. She said, "Ali, what do you want to learn about?" And I said, "Okay, all right, think about it for a second." And then I said, I want to learn about how schools have been used to indoctrinate kids of color with a sense of inferiority." And y'all, I'm feeling myself now because I'm 14 and I just used indoctrinate and inferiority in one sentence. I'm like, "Jess, keep up. Are you going to be able to handle what I want to learn about?" And to my surprise, Miss Hott said, "That's history. The study of education is the study of who has been excluded from education, how education has been used to discriminate against people." And she brought me books on what had happened to Indigenous students when they were put in boarding schools. She brought me books on what had happened to Black teachers after schools had been integrated. She brought me books on Maria Montessori and what it had took for her to integrate medicine as a woman in Italy. I tell folks to this day, I have never worked harder in any class in my life than I worked in Jessica Hatz's history class. And it was because I got to be self-determined in my learning. So then how does that translate 10 years later to me teaching foundations of leadership? Well, I sat there thinking about consent as the opposite of abuse and the opposite of entitlement. And I realized that I could create an alternate ending for my students, a different way of teaching. And so my approach was going to be for every assignment I gave in that class for 10 years, I would give another assignment, which was create your own assignment. And at first, students just kind of, used that as a tool to tell me what was going on in their lives, to tell me when they were overwhelmed or anxious or needed to adjust, the workload because of the things that were happening in their world. But gradually, as I built trust with the young people I was working with and got more committed to consent culture in the classroom, students started to adjust the assignments to work with their strengths. And I'll give you an example of that. I used to give students an assignment called Question Authority every year, where students would do an interview with somebody in a position of power, whether it was their parent or their pediatrician or the superintendent. I'm sorry. And eventually, students changed that from a written assignment to a recorded assignment. And so I saw students make that assignment have more questions. I saw students broadcast that assignment on Facebook Live. I saw students book interview time at radio stations, but students made the work harder by making it more interesting to themselves. And that became the trend in self-determined learning, is that students would do more, not less, more often than not, when they adjusted the assignment. The question I got the most when I was talking about consent culture with teachers was, what do you do when students do nothing? And I think that that is a funny question given how this story starts, right? This story starts with me doing nothing. And that wasn't because my teacher told me that was an option. The truth is in 10 years of teaching foundations of leadership and using consent culture as a tool in the classroom, not once did I have students completely opt out of any assignment or project. Instead, I had students adjust those projects to meet their needs and interests and to highlight their strengths and the dreams that they had for themselves. My favorite example of that is that at the end of the class, we would always kind of do this final project. And usually that looked like a presentation or, an essay or a variety of things that are kind of common in terms of final exams or final presentations. And I had a student named John Krim who came into class and said, hey, for the final, I would like to choreograph a dance that's really about like my own journey and self-discovery as a queer activist. And he did this performance in front of our entire class. And there was not a single person at the end of it who was not crying. It was one of the most beautiful days I've ever had in my educational career. In fact, thinking about it kind of brings me to tears. I think that part of what consent culture does in the classroom is it shifts the power dynamic. And I think part of what we want to do in creating healthy workplaces is acknowledge power dynamics and then leverage those power dynamics in ways that allows for people to rely on the leadership to get what they need from the people who are positioned to have greater authority, whether it is a classroom or a workspace. I do think the real like question around education for me is, are we preparing our kids for this world, or are we preparing our students to change it? And if we want our students to be equipped with the critical thinking skills to change the world, then we have to empower them to do things differently. And we have to do that as often as we possibly can. My last story before we kind of dive into the greater conversation that we're going to have today um, relates to the alternate ending in a more personal way. So I told myself this great lie. I think most people tell themselves this lie when I was pregnant with my oldest daughter, which is that I was going to do all the things that my parents did well, and none of the things that they did poorly. And I was able to really maintain that lie to myself until my oldest daughter was about 2 years old. When my daughter was 2 years old, we were at Target and she started to have this huge kind of meltdown tantrum. If there's any parents out there, I'm sure you're familiar with the in-store tantrum. And in that moment, I heard my mother's voice come out of my mouth for the first time in my life. If that has not happened to you yet, I want you to know that it's such a terrifying experience. It's truly like earth-shattering and groundbreaking to hear the voice of your parents directed at your kids. And what I said to my daughter, I'm sure you're all wondering, like, how were you parented, Ali? How'd you grow up? Was, do you want a reason to cry? If you grew up with the phrase, do you want a reason to cry? You know that it is not a question. It is often followed with, I will give you a reason to cry. And I'm not trying to make my parents sound like monsters or bad people. My parents were raising four children in the late 80s and the early 90s. And they thought it was really important that we understood that we lived in a world that didn't necessarily care about our feelings. Um, and what I took from that was that there was never a good reason to cry. And so for years, I really struggled with being able to connect with myself emotionally, to validate my own feelings, because that wasn't how I grew up. And so in that moment, hearing my mother's voice at Target while my kid is having this flailing moment, I thought to myself, I don't necessarily want Adrienne to have the same relationship to her feelings that I have to mine. And I think that it's really hard to reconsider the way that we were parented, right? And to determine what traditions we want to keep and what things we want to let go of. And I think a lot of it means interrupting your autopilot, interrupting the way you're used to things being said and done, the things you're most familiar with. And so I said, next time Adrienne cries, I'm going to make it super cool. I'm going to make it really special. I'm going to let her know that it's okay to cry and it's a good thing that she's crying, but I didn't know how. Um, Luckily for me, she's 2 years old. So she's crying exactly 17 minutes later. And this time we're at home. And I thought, this is great, Adrienne. It's so good you're crying. I'm so glad you're crying. Thank goodness you are crying because all your toys are dehydrated and toys only drink tears. And so I'm having this like massive winning moment as a parent, right? I'm a teacher, y'all. So the fact that I get to explain the importance of her feelings and dehydration at the same time, winning, winning, winning. And Adrienne loved this game. We played this game for about 3 years until she was about 5 years old. Whenever she would cry, we would line up her toys and they would drink her tears. And when she was 5, she said, she was a Montessori kid in early childhood. So she says, Mom, I don't want to play this game anymore. I want to write indie songs in my journal when I'm feeling sad. And I said, that's great. That's fine. I was not attached to this game. I'm going to let it go. But I wondered if she would remember her toys drinking her tears the way I remember, do you want a reason to cry? And a few years later, I was running for office for the first time, and her little sister, Azzy, was about 2 years old. And as he was crying because I was doing something horrible, like, putting her shoes on. And I was like, Azzy, we got to get going. I have a meeting at 9 o'clock. And Adrienne, being the very wise 7-year-old sister that she was, said, Mom, you always have a meeting. But Azzy's toys, they only drink her tears. And she lined up her sister's toys and they drank her tears. I think that that is a version of the alternate ending. And I think if we don't embody a willingness to change and a willingness to think about our own patterns and our own ability to contribute to things in a way that is harmful, that we're not really doing this work. And so I'm excited to engage in a conversation with you all about the power of alternate endings, the power of how to transform workspaces. And I want to open us up now for a little back and forth dialogue or any questions you all have about me, the work I do, and how alternate endings, creativity, and courage play into it.
I don't see any in the chat, but I can ask a question. I love your story. I especially love that story. I think the first time I heard it, I was super choked up. And uh, and it always gets me because I'm always thinking about my mother. I'm thinking about the conversation. I'm thinking about, you know, all of that, and how our voices sometimes creeps up, our parents' voices sometimes creeps up in us, even when we don't necessarily want it to. But I have a question about like the alternate story, and how do you embed that type of spirit in the classroom, you working in the classroom now, and you're having and young people, like how do you frame that experience with them understanding what that mean to have an alternate story when you're dealing with younger people?
I think with younger people are so much more receptive to the idea that we should change the world and that things can be done differently. And I think that as an educator, as a person in a position of power, a lot of that looks like surrendering power or neutralizing power in specific ways. I was really lucky to work with a psychologist in a group home a little over a decade ago. I tell people all the time, like everything is a few years ago for me because I have 3 children. So I can tell you everything that happened in Dr. McStuffin's life, but my own timeline is a little like wishy-washy. I worked with this child psychologist, and he would tell this incredible story about how he was working with this kid who in a group therapy setting who really was really mad and would throw off the entire group. And this went on for weeks. And at the end of a couple weeks, he said, listen, we're just going to do whatever you want to do today. And the kid said, okay. And he said, I have 2 rules, no violence, nothing sexual. And the kid said, okay. And the kid said, stand up. And the guy stood up and he said, okay, now get on all fours. And the guy said, I said nothing sexual. And the kid said, I'm not doing anything sexual, get on all fours. And then he said, bark like a dog. And the guy barked twice and the kid said, okay, man, get up. And that kid, that moment of trust, that moment of surrender allowed for them to work well together for a very long time and to really elevate the experience of everybody in the group. I have worked with all kinds of young people. I do think of myself as a pretty talented educator, mentor, organizer, instructor. And I was working with a student in early in my career who would just not do any work. We were supposed to write poetry. It was in English class, and he just was not writing. And I tried everything I could think of, right? Like every kind of incentive, and none of it was working. And finally, one day I said, hey, I need you to stay after class. We got to figure this out together. I said, what do you need from me to be successful? And he said, well, maybe if I had my headphones in and da 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 da. And little by little, he started to do more and more work until he was actually writing like all of these epic poems about how much he loved his mom, which is just like, oh my God. Like, that's the thing about like the toughest high school students is like once they're writing a poem, it's like definitely about how much they love their mom. Um, and so he starts to write these poems, and I stop asking him to stay after class for a few weeks straight. I had been every single day. I'd been like, we're going to stay after class. We're going to talk about how it goes. And so he had this great couple weeks, and I stopped asking him to stay after class. And he asked me to stay after class. And he said, you know, part of what really works for me is when you ask me how I'm doing, is when you ask me to stay after class, is when you ask me what works for me. And what I learned from that experience is the student is always the source of information in terms of what works for them. And if we go straight to them and say, what do you need? What would make you feel better about this work? How do you want to do it? Kids are excited to learn in a way that empowers them. And I think that that's probably one of the most like precious things I've ever learned in working with young people. And I think that's true for most people. Most people want to feel like they are empowered. I also want to say that students and most people want feedback to be a two-way street. And so anytime I was grading my students, they had the opportunity to grade me. And the curve was based on my grade, not theirs. Because if you think I'm doing a bad job teaching you, how can you do a good job learning? And so I'm very proud. I was never given like a super bad grade. I was given a lot of really critical and frank feedback because I did work with high school students. And so they did not just keep it to how I did my job. They were also critical of my outfit, and the speed at which I talk was like an ongoing, like, if you could chill, it would be really helpful. I got great feedback. I got decent grades from the students, but I think opening up a two-way street for feedback and empowering people to make real decisions about how they learn, how they work, is one of the most effective ways to lead in collaboration with others.
Thank you. That was very well articulated. Thank you so much for that. I have two questions. One, in the chat from Joe Maldonado. He asked, "What is something you're reading or listening to right now, and what is the most resonant insight from it?"
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. I just started a book that is about um, how racism shows up online. And I think that the most resonant thing about it is how it reinforces an idea that I got from Joanne Kloppenberg when I was running for office the second time. So I sat down with Joanne Kloppenberg, and she's a judge on the Court of Appeals, and she had run twice in the state of Wisconsin to be on the Supreme Court, and she had lost both times. And I asked her what she would do differently. And she said, there was a group of reporters that were really conservative that followed her from place to place, and they intimidated her. They made her really uncomfortable. They would yell things at her, and she shut down, and she would not engage with them. She would not talk to them. And because of that, they wrote whatever they wanted about her.
Hmm.
And she
Hmm.
told me, I would have hugged all of them. I would have learned
Hmm.
all of their names, because if
Hmm.
I had gotten to know them, they wouldn't have been able to erase me in terms of who
Hmm.
I am. I would have been able to show up in as my real self with them, and that would have meant something. It would have meant that they had to tell the story that I was engaged with them around. I think that this book, really reminds me of experiences I've had where people have been really feisty online, and then I invite them to coffee, and 20 minutes in, we're just talking about like how much we care about our kids and how much we want our schools to work well.
Hmm.
That's a great question. I
Hmm.
cannot remember the title of the book, so I'm going to look for it really quick.
Okay. And there is a part two to his question, and then we have a question from Jenna Klink, and so she will unmute herself and ask the question. So the part two of his question is, what is something that has surprised you this week?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Something that surprised me this week. I did an interview yesterday with the police chief on
Mhm.
WORT 89.9 FM. He was actually the speaker last week. And him and I have mostly engaged in this conversation about police in schools. And anybody who knows me knows I am not in favor of police in schools. Um, for many, many reasons. One simple reason is that I went to the Dane County Juvenile Detention Center once a week, every week for 14 months. And there was not a single time I entered that facility where the majority of the children, and when I say majority, I mean 90% of the children incarcerated in the Dane County Juvenile Detention Center, which is like 5 blocks from where I'm sitting right now, were Black. If I took you to Germany today and the majority of the students in their juvenile detention center were Jewish, you would understand that the German people have a history of incarcerating and killing Jewish children. In the United States, in Madison, Wisconsin, in Dane County, we have a history of incarcerating, enslaving, segregating Black children. In 18 years of having police in schools, Black students were the majority of children arrested every single year. The last year police were in schools, not a single white students are the largest demographic in our school system, not a single white student was arrested. Every single student was a child of color. Me and him have only engaged in that conversation, and we are on different ends of that conversation. We have different beliefs. And it was really surprising to get to talk to him about his career. And it was deeply humanizing to hear him talk about the ways in which he's been very critical of policing, because we just had never had the opportunity to have that conversation. And so he was incredibly generous with me in terms of answering the questions I asked, and also was deeply gracious and vulnerable in talking about himself. And I have to admit, it surprised me. I thought it would be a far more contentious and political conversation. And it was really, really loving.
Awesome. And it was so ironic that he was our part two speaker for our Black History series. So that's wonderful that you guys were able to have that conversation and like rediscover an alternate, ending, in understanding one another. So we have another question from Jenna. Jenna, if you want to unmute and ask your question, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. Um, My question is related to if you have any advice on how to navigate something I've noticed at my children's school. You talked about like the dynamics of as a teacher feeling like, oh, I have to be, not that you felt this way, but other people said like, well, you have to be with the other teachers, like you're not supposed to question what they do. And I was a parent at 2 field trips this year, chaperone, and one of the support staff who is always with the quote problem children, I have observed her talking very, very rudely to those children. And so far, all I've done to address it is when it happened in front of me and she didn't even know I was there behind her. She was basically like screaming at a kid, telling them to move when they weren't doing anything wrong. And I was like, actually, nope, this kid is in my group. Like, they're with me and they don't need to move any faster because I'm right here. And she's just like, oh my God, I didn't know. And after that, for the next 45 seconds while I was still in hearing distance, she was like Jekyll and Hyde. Like, she kept calling the kids sweetie, all of this bullshit. Honestly, she became a completely different person in how she talked to the kids based on everything else of how I've seen her with the kids. And it was all just a show because she knew I was there. So my question is, just based on like the dynamics of how schools work on the inside, which I'm not an expert on at all, do I talk to the principal? Do I talk to the teacher that she supports because I have a relationship a little bit with him? I talked already with the parent coordinator and she said that this lady needs to retire, but it's like, where is my power as a parent and how do I navigate the dynamics of that situation? If I could ask for advice on that based on what you know of schools.
I think that's a really powerful question. And my advice is to document a pattern of behavior if that's what you're observing. So document what you're seeing when you're seeing it, and provide that information first to the principal. And then I would set up a meeting to talk about next steps to resolve that. I do think your priority has to be this dynamic is damaging to the learning of these young people. And there needs to be some reconciliation process around one, like acknowledging that this is going on, and two, acknowledging the impact it has on students. What you're observing is not abnormal across our district. So I want you to be aware that those kinds of trends in which you see people show up very differently for different students or show up very differently when somebody is watching. Those are things I was aware of as a student. And what I will say is the teachers who step in or the people who step in to do something about it are people who really stand out in the minds of the young people as they experience that kind of injustice. So an example for me would be, I really struggled in school. I really hated school, in part because I was treated in ways that were really inappropriate for me as a kid. And I'm like, we could do those stories, but that's a whole different round of stories. What I will say is in 7th grade, I met my mentor, Amanda Postel, and she helped me work on a project. She ran an after-school tutoring program called Juventud Mas. Thank God for Juventud Mas, y'all. Support Centro Hispano. That program was life-changing for me because this adult stepped in. She was working with all the quote-unquote problem kids, and she saw us really differently than other teachers, and she treated us really differently than other teachers. And she helped me work on an assignment, and I got a B on the assignment. And I was so proud to show it to her. And she said, why'd you get a B? And I said, I don't know, Amanda, a B is a good grade. Like, let's celebrate. And she was like, you deserved an A. And she marched me back to that teacher and asked the teacher, why'd Ali get a B? And the teacher did not have a good reason and changed my grade to an A. I would not have made it through the vast majority of college courses I took if I did not have the skill set to argue that my point was valid, my way of doing things was valid, that I was intellectually valid. And she was the first person to not only make me feel seen in the injustice of how I was being treated, but to also make me feel smart. And that was life-changing for me, especially as a 12-year-old Black girl in Madison, Wisconsin. So if you see it, doing something about it will be something your students remember for a very long time, or the young people you work with remember for a very long time. And doing the work of pushing for change, I think means following up and continuing to push and documenting that behavior so that you have kind of a clear pattern that you can discuss with the principal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for stepping in, and thanks for asking the question.
Thank you for that question, Jenna. And I have another question from Carrie Ecker. She asked, what was the primary motivator for you to run for school board, and what have you found most interesting about that role?
The primary motivator for me to run for school board was that I went to school here. I grew up here. This is my hometown. I love this community with my whole heart and soul. And I had really loved working with young people in my classroom and in a variety of settings, but I felt like I was working with students and creating these environments where they could learn and be safe. And the way the rest of the school was working, or the rest of the system was working, was damaging my credibility. Kids would very much be like, yeah, I can come into this classroom and be treated well, but I go out into this larger system, and it's not designed for me to succeed. And no one's doing anything about that. And no one was doing anything about that when I was a kid. And I'm sending my own children to this district right now. I have a kiddo at O'Keefe Middle School, and I have a kiddo at Lowell Elementary School, and I have a 2-year-old who's in daycare, and it's really expensive. And I wanted to commit long term to doing something about this problem that I am so intimately aware of.
Awesome. Any other questions? You guys are free to unmute and ask your questions, or drop the questions in the chat. Or if you have more intimate questions and want to hold them for the one-on-one at 1 o'clock, we can do that as well. Any other questions from our committee? I'm scrolling through. I don't see anything popping up. If I don't see any questions, and if you are still thinking and processing what your question would be, again, you can hold on and as Eva close out this conversation and open it up for the one-on-one. I'll turn it over to Eva.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Ali, for spending this amazing hour with us. It was super insightful and a great way to continue our series. On behalf of AABERG, as well as our colleagues, friends, partners of Division of Extension, it's our hope that we can all call upon you to continue to engage us in this meaningful and necessary dialogue. I was just thinking, like, so many folks on this Zoom are educators, whether that's to youth, to adults. So the wisdom that you shared really applies to all of us in the outreach and the programming we choose to do and how we do it. And I'm specifically thinking, with 4-H, it's all about youth voice and how do we get youth involved and having them be leaders. So I wonder if we can call on you in the future to help us, if we need some guidance. But
I would absolutely love to. I'm always a resource to you all. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, through WMF, through the Madison Metropolitan School Board. Truth is, because I'm an elected official, my address and my phone number are listed on the MMSD website. So if you want to get a hold of me, you absolutely can. I would love to work with you again. It's been such a gift to get to talk to you all. Thank you for your questions and for listening to my story.
thank you. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of pearls or nuggets that you said that really stood out to me. And I wanted to again highlight the power of an alternate ending. You said teaching leadership is teaching an orientation of imagination. Using consent culture as a tool in the classroom and shifting that power dynamic. And sometimes you need to interrupt your autopilot. So I just wanted to highlight those things. And again, just say thank you so much. As a reminder, everyone, Ali's full bio and a recording of today's sessions can be found on our SharePoint site. We hope that you have enjoyed yourself in return for our Black Voices Matter series, which will continue next Wednesday, February 29th, as we welcome Kurt Rose, Manager of Employee and Labor Relations for the City of Madison. Thank you to everyone, excuse me, thank you to everyone who joined this live discussion today. And those who will be watching the recording, thank you for taking the time to watch this phenomenal discussion. For those of you who will stay logged in to have more of an intimate Q&A with Ali, just give us a second. Otherwise, have a wonderful afternoon and hope to see you next week.